My name is Rich Schmidt. I'm here with Mark Royer. It's July 13th, 2021. We're at Royer Vineyard in Salem. Mark, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate this.
Oh, fantastic. Thanks for coming out.
First question, biggest one to get us started, as you know, is why wine?
That is the question. You know, I remember last year seeing this t-shirt that said, you know, wine is the glue that holds this 2020 shit show together. And that kind of resonated, not just at the level of 2020, which had its issues, but in general, wine is kind of a glue. It binds. It binds friendships, it binds memories, binds occasions, families. And so when I think back, you know, to some of my highlights in life, you know, my greatest memories, and what was the glue that brought those together, it's always wine. Whether you're in Europe in a cellar walking through, smelling the dirt and the mold and looking at these bottles that are older than I am, or sitting in an Italian winemaker's living room while the parents are cooking food for you, and you're trying to understand what they're saying. Riding bikes through vineyards, you know, whether it's in Oregon or in Burgundy, and just walking the rows, you know, and just seeing what's going on. Dinners, obviously meals around friends and family. You know, those are the things that when I reflect, those are what come into my head. You know, I could be sitting here with my wife on the porch, watching the sunset, and that's a beautiful memory. So when you ask why wine, you know, I honestly can't imagine life without it.
So take us through kind of your early life, upbringing. Where were you born? Where were you raised? And what did you do after high school?
Well, thank God, not before high school. Yeah, raised in Cleveland, Ohio. So, you know, Midwestern boy. You know, there's this Alex Bevan song, "Skinny Little Boy from Cleveland, Ohio," and that was one of the songs we played here at the wedding. As I came out in outfit number 2, which was a full-on Cleveland Browns suit, highly combustible suit. So
melts down every January.
Yeah. So, like, I didn't grow up with a family that drank wine. You know, it was a non-drinking or a beer-drinking family. Never had a glass of wine in my life until college, and at that point, you know, it was this beautiful wine and food pairings called Mad Dog and Velveeta, and that was my entree into wine. It did not get much better for the next couple years. I remember my girlfriend at the time, her parents giving me this beautiful bottle for my birthday. It was a Napa Valley Cloudeval. And luckily I was not in front of them when I opened it, because after one sip I poured it down the drain and went back to drinking a PBR. So it got better. It got better because my first job, I took a job on Wall Street, and the department took me out for a dinner. And they said, "Mark, you know, you're the new guy. You can pick any bottle on the wine list you want." And at this time, you were talking late 80s, right? So money was flowing left and right, and there was not an issue. And I looked at the wine list and I said, all right, I'm not going to do the most expensive, which was a Burgundy wine with 3 initials. Although in retrospect, I should have. It might have taken me on a different course. So I picked the second most expensive wine, which is a 1970 Chateau Palmer. And that was probably my aha bottle. It's like, wow, I do like wine, and this is quite amazing. So it was that week that I went out to the bookstore in the World Trade Center, and I bought Kevin Zerali's book, you know, Windows of the World. And I took that book to my local wine shop with $20. And I met the owner, and I said, listen, here's what we're going to do. Every week we're going to do a chapter. I'm going to give you $20 or $30. You're going to bring wines that fit the chapter. I'm going to drink them during that week. I'm going to come back and we're going to talk about it. And we're going to do a new chapter. And so we progressed through that book. And that was a fantastic learning opportunity for me about wine in general, about grapes, about regions, about styles. And it progressed from there. You know, picking up, you know, my $20 or $30 became $50. And I bought more than I could consume in a week. So you start building up bottles, and hence the collection started. And I guess that kind of takes me to, you know, a little bit post-college at that point.
So what was, you mentioned kind of an early job on Wall Street. What did you go to college for, and what were you sort of anticipating as your career path?
So college, I went to Lafayette College. And initially I was enrolled as an EE, And before I started, they had a new major, computer science. You know, this is 1983, so computer science was a new thing. And they were going to select 6 people to participate in this new program. So I'm like, yeah, I'll do it. And so I was one of the 6, and it was a tremendous failure. They did not have the resources, the faculty, anything. So partway through the year, the whole thing was abolished, and I was like, wow, what do I do? And so at an event in the fall, I met this guy, Bill Simon, who was an alumni and was donating a lot of money to start a new economics center. And so he's like, Mark, what do you think about economics? I said, well, gosh, I don't know. And by the end of that evening, and a few classes of imbibement, he convinced me to become an economics major, which is what I did. And economics and finance became, you know, what I was into. Mm-hmm. And I went on to doing an MBA down in Richmond, Virginia. And then on to jobs, you know, Wall Street and investment banking. And then ultimately, that was both New York and then to Virginia. And then out to Sand Hill Road in California to do the venture capital gig for a while, at which point I had had enough finance.
I'm curious about that. What was after the initial kind of, I'm going to be an econ major, what was the draw for you beyond that into the career, and what did you enjoy about it, and then why did you eventually leave it?
The draw in, I think, was friends. You know, a year ahead of me, graduated college, you know, they had gone onto Wall Street, and I saw their path, I saw their life. It was something that I wanted as well, and so following kind of in their footsteps was what brought me to Wall Street. And leaving Wall Street was a decision of lifestyle. You know, the idea of back then, this is, you know, getting married to my first wife. New York just wasn't a place we wanted to raise a family, and so we thought about where we would go. You know, where's another financial hub, but allows you to kind of live in the country a little bit. And Richmond, Virginia was where she got a job, and so perhaps that was the driver to take us down south a little bit. And she being from, you know, down south, it kind of brought her closer to family as well. So that was the move there, and ultimately, you know, the South is the South, and after a decade, it was like, great, that's fantastic, but I was yearning to travel west. And the yearn actually came, if I could backtrack a minute, from another one of those kind of moments in life that move you along the wine course. And as I was learning about wine with this wine shop, I met this gentleman, John, and he, I don't know, kind of took me under his wing a little bit and educated me on finer wines, you know, ones I could not afford. First growth and such. And he's like, Mark, he goes, I'm going to take a few guys to California. We have these great visits. You're going to see what they do out there. And I've never been to California. I've never been to the West Coast. So I was like, sign me up. I'll go. So we had a fantastic 4 or 5 days, you know, ate great food, met, you know, famous winemakers, saw the big Napa wine factories as they seem to be. But for me, it was like walking the vineyards. I was like, wow, this is really special, right? Just endless streams of grapes and leaves and dirt. And so that was kind of a spark for me that really I wanted to pursue that further. And I kind of forget where this thread was going as I backtracked. Perhaps you could pull me back to what I was saying.
Heading back west for the second time.
So heading back to, so I kind of had that still in my head. I wanted to get back west. And when this opportunity came up to do it, I took it. And so we packed up and moved. And this was at 9/11. This was right then. So we had just sold the house. We had the airplane tickets booked. You know, we had all these animals, 5 animals coming on the airplane with us. Everything, you know, was being shipped. And then the airlines say, no, there's no animals coming on board this airplane. We're like, gosh, what do we do? So Cruise America, right? Here we come. So we packed all the animals and packed food and did a road trip, which was not my favorite road trip, as you can imagine. And we did 16-hour days, and we got here coast to coast in less than 3 days. and voila, right? I mean, welcome to California. And it was within a week, one of the cats just took off. It's just like, I've had enough of this. It's the only male cat, with 4 females, and you would think he was having a good time, but apparently not.
Tell me about California then. You'd visited, you kind of had this notion in your head, you'd seen wine, you'd seen vines. Tell me about coming back as a resident, and what were your first impressions when you got back?
Sure, yeah. Living, down in the Bay Area, you're close to vines, but they're not in your backyard. So it does take some effort to make a road trip out of it. But the effort's worth it. And quite often we would make those road trips. Initially, join wine clubs. At one point I was in 20-something wine clubs, right? And you can't go to every party. So like wine clubs become less important because you can buy the wine at your local wine shop for the same price, give or take. So going through iterations of meeting winemakers and asking questions and participating. That's the thing, you got to participate. And if you don't, you won't learn. So we participated for years, and the collection grew. We built a wine cellar in the house, and the collection grew. But it was kind of, that's where it was, right? There was no desire to be in wine. There was a desire to make wine a part of life. But your vocation and your avocation are 2 different things. Then it was, I had done the VC thing for a while, and it was with dinner one night. A good friend of mine and his wife came over, and he brought these beautiful wines. I remember 89 and 90 Margaux and La Missy Aubryon, plus some beautiful Yquem. And he told me about his day. And he said, I did this thing called the French Wine Society. I did this Masters of Burgundy course, and I just graduated today. And of course, we're drinking Bordeaux. So I think he had enough Burgundy at that point. So I was fascinated by getting educated all of a sudden. And so the next day, I signed up with French Wine Society and went through the Master of Burgundy, the next time they had that course, and learned a lot about Burgundy and became fascinated with it, because at that point I had not really, and this probably goes back, 10 years ago, I had not really had a lot of Burgundy. A lot of California Pinot and Chardonnay, a lot of Cabernet, Bordeaux. So now learning about Burgundy was fun and different and cool. And then it was like, all right, what do I do next? Like this monster came alive, and I was like, I need more. So it was like, a friend of mine was doing the Somme series, and that sounded, fun, but I really didn't want to learn everything that they were teaching. I don't want to carry a plate of wine glasses and serve wine. I want to learn business of wine. And so I was turned on to something called the WSETs, and that had a similar bent, but it was more business. And it's like, fantastic, I'm going to do this. And so I embarked upon that and went through the levels, including diploma. And it was as I was graduating through diploma, I had the spark to bring the avocation and the vocation together. And I know finance, I now sort of know parts of wine through books. Can I pull these 2 together somehow? And at the time I was banking with one of the banks down in the Bay Area that does a lot of wine banking, and had a talk with them. And although I didn't ultimately go to work for them, I went to work with another bank that was starting up kind of a similar thing in Sonoma. And so, although they were established in Napa already, they didn't really have a Sonoma component. And so we worked out a job, and I was going to be a wine banker. And it's like, great, I'm bringing together all the things that I want to do in a job. And that was fantastic for a couple years. And ultimately I decided, it's still banking. And it's not enough wine. And I need to get rid of this banking part. So it was about that time again that I was approached by a friend who had gone through the WSETs as well. And he's like, Mark, what do you think about starting a wine merchant business? And we talked about it and went over what that would mean and how it would look, and spent months doing this. And that was the kind of genesis of Courtier Wines, which is a company I still am a part owner in, and it's located in the Bay Area, and we import French and Italian wines, mostly Burgundy, Champagne, Barolo, etc. And that was, all right, then I'm full-time wine now. All right, this is it. This is a real McCoy. And we're, 3 guys plus a couple employees, making no money because we have to pay investors back. But can we make this thing work? And that was 2015. And it's still going. 6 years, later, we're still not getting paid much. And so that's what took me to full-time wine. And then this vineyard is a whole separate animal. And this was kind of thought of retirement project, if you will, which it has not become. It's become get back to work project. But that's, we could save that for another question.
Sure. Well, before we get to that, then let's back up for a second. You mentioned the WSET. Tell me about the biggest takeaways for you from that, and as you were learning wine, all the different ways you were learning wine, you were educating your palate, then you were sort of taking the formal education. What were the things about wine education that appealed to you? What did you enjoy learning the most when it came to wine?
Sure. I've always loved education. I've been kind of that geek, if you will. And especially when it comes to numbers. That's, in addition to having an economics major, I had a physics minor, and it's all about numbers. Everything's about numbers for me, and which is, has its pros and its cons, obviously. But to get more into wine education, it's just like I needed to learn more, right? I was hanging around people that knew more, and you can drink all day long and build your kind of muscle memory on the palate. But I still needed to know, why things were, why, how, what makes it tick. Like a clock builder, right? Like get into the gears. And so education was the only way I was going to make that happen. And it was quite easy to get educated. You do it in your spare time. You can do it from home, or back then, you go out to the local hotel, the Marriott or whatever, with a group of people, and you taste the wine that the teacher presents, and you form a palate. You understand things. Like, I had a hard time initially telling the difference between a raspberry and a strawberry, even though I eat them every day. When I drink a glass of wine, I can't tell you, is that raspberry, strawberry? I don't know. It's a red berry. Do I care? Not really. And still to this day, I kind of don't care that much. What I want to know is structure and balance, and because the flavor components to me are going to change from minute to minute and from whatever I'm eating at the time. But the structure is kind of the structure. And so it was important to learn structure because that then became something I could discuss with people. You can discuss flavor characteristics and as it were, but when you really got into acid and tannin and body, viscosity, things like that, that's when the conversation for me got interesting, because then that relayed back to terroir and the land and what's creating the structure. And so the take back then went from just having these conversations at events and dinners to wanting to learn about land. And so the WSET helped me learn land, from why European land, why Burgundy and its limestone is different from volcanic soils here. What is it? What's creating the grape? So education had to happen at that level, and it did. And that's kind of what took me through the WSETs. And I had thought about pursuing further education, the Master of Wine. Honestly, at that point, I had started Courtier, and for me, it was like, great, get the Master of Wine. What's that going to really do for me at this point? Is it going to help me start another company? No, I just started one, I'm fine. I'd rather not spend any more money on education at that point, and get a business going that has good genesis. So that was the end of education, formally, and still is to the most part. Odds and ends here and there, but.
So when it came to wines themselves and what you found yourself drawn to drinking and drawn to coming back to, describe for me the wines that appealed to you. What did you find that was sort of the kind of the through line for wines that you
Sure.
wanted to drink, and was there something about the way they were grown that you found that was something that was similar?
Going back, I was drawn to California. That's where I was. That's where I lived. I recall a trip to Paso Robles, and You know, they have these big Zinfandel events where there's dozens and dozens of winemakers and hundreds of bottles of 16% Zinfandel flying around in a hot summer day, and you know, by noon you don't even know where you are. And I left that weekend with the SUV filled to the brim with cases of wine and one really big outdoor chair, which I still don't know why I bought that thing. I still have it, by the way. You know, it's one of those things that you don't know why you bought it, but it's fantastic, and you keep it the rest of your life, which is what's happened. And, you know, since then I was like, wow, I really bought a lot of interesting wine that I'm not going to drink that much. So ultimately that wine sat around for a long time and ended up in various venues that didn't matter so much. Mm-hmm. But I think I started off big and bold, and in red, not white, still not sparkling. And then it through the process, I think, of education and meeting people that drank other wines, that's how the palate changed. Mm-hmm. You know, even though, as I said earlier, I'd gone through the Kevin book and tried all the wines, you know, at a base level, mm-hmm. and formulated opinions. You know, proximity is what drove my drinking, and I was close to Cabernet. So I guess from there, you know, just like I said, meeting people and going to different dinners, and then obviously starting Courtier. Our business was not really Napa Cabernet, even though we acquired collections that had vast, you know, vast sellers of old Napa Cab, which is a phenomenal product. Mm-hmm. Some of those, you know, back from the 60s and 70s to this day are quite amazing. Mm-hmm. And every now and again you get a beautiful Chard from back then that still is hanging in there, right? It's like they can do it, they did it, you know, back in the day they did it. But so it was time to evolve, I guess, and my palate changed, my food changed. I ate less red meat, more fish, more salads. Mm-hmm. So, wow, okay, this Cab tastes really terrible with this, right? So what do we drink? Wow, white wine. All right, so let's try Chardonnay. And so off to Chardonnay I went, and that had its roller coaster ride. You know, as Chardonnay went from something enjoyable to something buttery and oaky, and I had not really experienced Burgundy at that point. I'm stuck on California still at this stage of my life. But Burgundy did come. Mm-hmm. And it's just, there's a saying that my friend told me, all roads lead to Burgundy, right? And I'm sure you've heard this, and they do. And I've seen it with many of my clients, and it's true. Your palate changes. You don't have that desire to drink big and bold. Mm-hmm. You want a little more refinement and elegance, and you really need to branch out. Like at this point, I drink much more white wine than red wine. In the winter, maybe some red, but in the summer, it's pretty much exclusively white and champagne, you know, bubbles. And that's fantastic, you know, to diverge a little bit here, that Oregon is getting big into bubbles. So for me, this is this is something we could talk about the future of Oregon, but I'll slip it in now, that I love the fact that Oregon's making a push, you know, into bubbles, because I think we have the ability to do it on a fantastic scale with high quality. So I'll leave it there for now.
We'll definitely come back to it. So now you're in California. You're full-time wine. You're out of banking. You've got your company. So how do we get from there to sitting here in
Sure,
West Salem, Oregon?
So as I said, it was kind of a retirement idea. I mean, initially we had looked for land in Italy, and some friends of ours in California had this. He's an architect, a pretty famous architect in San Francisco, and she's a restaurant owner from Lucca. They had a property in Umbria, you know, with the old buildings kind of there. And being an architect, he was able to design into a modern, but keeping the old bricks and stones and things. And the idea was, you know, you're going to create these two buildings. It's got vineyards, it's olive trees, vegetable gardens. You're in Umbria, beautifully. We could do farm to table. We can bring bicycling companies through here. On and on the story goes. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So it was like, yes, I'm all in. So, you know, we flew over. They had been there 6 months prior, and they had caretakers and this and that. So I'm expecting something phenomenal, right? And I'm all ready to either buy or partner or something like that. So we get there, and the building, so he had built, the guest house was built already. It was completely overgrown with the Italian equivalent of kudzu. And this is in 6 months. And the vineyard's gone. Chingali have ravished it. The olive trees are not looking good. And I look over, I was like, I don't think this is going to work. Because at this point, I'm not going to enjoy Italy anymore. It's going to become a never-ending project. And I really want to enjoy Italy. So the next day, we took off to Lucca and enjoyed the rest of our trip. And that was the end of my foray into wanting to buy something abroad. So I came back and I was like, all right, where do I want a piece of land? California was out of the question. I couldn't afford it. And then it was kind of an inspiration from friends in California who moved up here a year or two prior, bought a piece of land, started to develop a vineyard, refurbished the old house on it, and made it work. They did it, right? They made the move, and they have, and it's in Oregon. It's like, wow, that's pretty close. And it's Pinot and Chardonnay. At that point, two of my favorite grapes. So, a little due diligence and one vacation, brought me here to look at various vineyard pieces, really. And this was one of them. I had all intent to spend a year because I'm a bit analytical. I wanted to understand AVAs up here. I did not know them. I wanted to understand soils. I want to understand the people, the players, And so it's like, all right, this is going to take a year. But I do like this piece of property. It's pretty nice. And at the time, it was like a forest, and pigs were living here, and there was this single wide that the neighbors had many interesting nicknames for. And so it was, an interesting piece of land, right? But I expressed an interest to the realtor. And the property had been on and off the market for 4 years, no bites at all. So lo and behold, a week later, the realtor calls me and says, Mark, there's somebody interested in a property, so if you want it, you might want to put an offer in. And I'd played in real estate here and there, for a number of years, and it's like, okay, yeah, I'm sure there's another buyer. So I said, you know what? I said, but in case there is, I don't want to lose this property, and so what is the price I would offer today that I would have zero regret if they took it? Like, I could still spend another year analyzing and sell this if it's not the one. And so I came up with that number, and I gave it to the realtor. I said, here's my number. And lo and behold, they took it. I was like, where's your other buyer? So this is how I ended up with this piece, right? And, I have no regrets. It's the perfect piece of land. We brought Andy Gallagher up here from Red Hills and did the soil pits and the whole report, and it was exactly what I wanted. And I think during this process too, I learned that if your focus is Chardonnay, which from the get-go mine was going to be Chardonnay, this Eolamine is where you want to be. But I did not know that at the time. So it all worked out. Everyone says luck. It's preparation and timing. I think for me it was just timing. There wasn't a lot of preparation.
Kind of post-preparation.
Yeah, post-preparation, yeah.
So I'm curious, before we get to that part of it, I'm curious about when you did do kind of your due diligence on Oregon, what was your impression of the Oregon wine industry? Had you had a lot of Oregon wines previously, and what were your impression of those as well?
The answer is no. I've not had a lot of Oregon wines. In my brief foray into banking, we had a few clients up here. So I was able to learn a little bit and try a few wines, but no, Oregon was not really on my radar for consumption. It was on my radar as America's kind of premier Pinot producer. Not Chardonnay yet at that point. And it is, again, put yourself back 6 years. Chardonnay was out there, but it wasn't known as being great. But Pinot was, right? So I guess my impression was this is a great place for Pinot. I love Pinot, but I want to grow Chardonnay. And why Chardonnay, I guess, is the question. And first off, I love it. It's what I like to drink. That and Riesling, which is why we have a little bit of Riesling planted here as well. But I thought Chardonnay was still developing. And I wanted to be part. First off, if I planted Pinot, I'd be a small fish in a big sea. And that didn't really appeal to me. But to be part of something that, in my opinion, was getting underway and had a lot of development potential was what excited me. So the two things, I like drinking it, and if I can't sell any, I can at least drink it all. And I saw this, but the finance side came out, right? Supply and demand. There's a lot of demand happening for Chardonnay. There's not a lot of vineyards planted right now. Of course, today there are. It's a whole different game. So I feel like, I was kind of in a little bit early on planting Chardonnay. And today, I don't know, I think there might be one other vineyard around that's 100% Chardonnay, or like no Pinot, but certainly not too many. So I kind of put all my eggs in one basket, rolled the dice, yo 11. But I'm happy. I'm happy it worked out. I feel it's worked out, so far. And I got, again, no regrets, right? It's the pieces all fell into place. But I think it's a matter of sometimes you shoot first and aim second, and it's not always the best approach. But as long as after you shoot and you look back at your aim and you learn from that aim, did I have the right instinct? You can carry that forward, which is kind of how this has gone. And then now we've got a house here, and this is full-time living. I recall when I was developing this, so it was purchased 2016, and land development, clearing, all happened 2016, 2017, and then the house, the structure started being built in 2018. But I had nowhere to live, and we're an hour plus south of Portland. It's kind of hard to drive there at nighttime. I mean, what I did from California was day trips. Honestly, I'd take the 6 o'clock flight up. I'd come down here, take care of stuff, get on a 9 o'clock flight back home, and it was just like a day commuting. All right. Ultimately, that got tiring. So I set up a little campsite, down over here, and started tent camping. And I did that, summer of 16. No winters now, mind you, just summers. Summer of 16, summer of 17, and part of 18. In 18, I actually ended up getting an apartment in Portland, just to make life a little bit simpler. I'm getting old. I can't tent camp forever. But yeah, it was fantastic to live on the land and to hear, what's walking around at night, and to understand the vibe, right? To become one with the land, as it were. And that's what did it for me. And that, guided many decisions. I recall the night before we planted these first 10 acres. We had everything scheduled, certain rural orientations and this and that. And I had dinner in McMinnville with someone you've interviewed, Tomas over at Lingua Franca, and David Honig, and a few other people. And we were discussing, rural orientation. And by the end of the dinner, decided to change the orientation, from one way to another way. And of course, meeting the vineyard manager the next morning, he's ready with his crew with the pencil rods. No, pull out the blueprint. And so on the hood of the car, we redid the whole thing, while all the workers are waiting, somewhat patiently or impatiently, to get working. But again, it's one of those things. We sort of shot first, as it were. But that decision and that slight delay of a half a day, again, no regrets. It was the right decision, because now my orientation is exactly the way I would want it.
So you described a little bit what the land looked like when you purchased it. Tell me about what you learned from it before you planted. What do you have? What did you have here? What were the sort of the raw components you had here, and how did that sort of guide what you wanted to do and where you wanted to do it? Sure.
Yeah. So this is a volcanic site, first off, and it's typically shallow soils with sort of one pocket exception of Jory, but mostly it's Rittner, some Nakaya, a lot of Witzel. So very shallow, low water holding capacity. And we're at between 600 and 700 feet. So that was one thing I guess I was looking for in a vineyard, is I wanted elevation. I think one thing we're facing is climate change. It's very apparent out here. It's very apparent as you grow crops, right? You see the impact immediately. So elevation was important to me. I'd looked at a site or two that was 1,000. 6 years ago, 1,000 didn't make sense. Today, it's perfect sense. And it was also like, I knew I was going to live on the vineyard. So it has to have some sort of potential for aesthetic beauty, right? Something I'm going to look at every day. And you know, the east side, I guess, is traditional in grape growing because the sun comes up, it warms the dew off the grapes, they dry, it inhibits, you know, mildews and stuff like that. But I ended up on the west side. Again, one of those things, you know, shot first. But no regrets again, because I love the sunsets. And every day, pretty much, we get the most amazing sunset. And you watch out and you see the hawks flying around and the sun setting. And that glass of champagne with your wife is a perfect way to end a day. It's quite meditative. And I think, you know, your mindset is important to managing a vineyard as well. And if you're really not into what you're doing, and it's not a love, you know, I don't know if you're necessarily going to fail, but I don't think you're going to have your best foot forward. So for me, I needed a place I was really going to fall in love with, as well as have all the components. So the components, you know, elevation, the soil types. You know, I love the shallow soils. You know, from the wines I had tried, wines off Witzel were very compelling to me. You know, whether it's Pinot or Chardonnay, they just had something about them. I wanted the Van Duzer. You know, this with Chardonnay, the Van Duzer was key for me. The wind, and you can feel a little bit now, but as soon as that sun sets, that wind just sucks in here, and it's drying everything off. It's, you know, toughening up the skins a bit, which helps them to resist, you know, whatever wants to come in and take them out. And then it was just like, I also just didn't want miles and miles of vineyard around me. I wanted trees. I wanted habitat, right? And this had great oak trees on it. And it's like, oaks were important to me. Not just, they provide so much. They provide, you know, a resting point for hawks, which we need hawks around here to take care of rodents. They provide, you know, the blackberries, lots of blackberries here, and they are habitat for all sorts of creatures and birds. And it was all about just creating this habitat that was inclusive and not just a vineyard, which is why, you know, with this rest of the planting that we can consider, this other 6 acres, is it going to be more grapes? I don't know. You know, it may not be. It may be apples, maybe more hazelnut trees inoculated with truffles, like we started an acre of a few years ago. Who knows what it's going to be? But somehow it's going to add diversity in whatever it is. But I think those were the key points here. You know, and after reading the soil reports, I was very convinced that this was a great place to grow Chardonnay. Now, it would grow great Pinot, and most people probably would have planted Pinot here. And as you know, I gave you the reasons why I did not plant Pinot, but also thinking, you know, about climate change. Pinot Noir has a small tolerance for change in temperature. It's like 4, you know, degrees on average growing. Chardonnay has a much larger band. So just from a pure perspective of longevity, you know, Chardonnay made more sense to me, because I just think it can fight climate change a little bit better. Riesling, on the other hand, I don't know, you know. Maybe that'll get I don't know. But yeah, so I think that's, you know, that's the land. That's what we've got here.
So you came into this without really any farming background, and obviously you've hired good people to help with the project. But tell me what you had to learn about farming and what you have learned since the grapes have gone in.
Sure, everything, absolutely everything. I knew a few things from books, and I knew a few things from my childhood, you know, in Ohio, you know, on various farms. But in reality, I knew nothing. Luckily, the Oregon Wine Symposium was right after I closed on this property. So that was my opportunity to go to every seminar, talk to every person, talk to all the vendors, see who I needed down here, and that's what happened. You know, as soon as that symposium was over, I had contractors down here, I had vineyard development people down here, I had Department of Forestry down here. They were all here, and talk, and take a lot of notes. You know, it's like I remember when I bought my first house. This was back in Virginia. And I knew zero about houses. I mean, I could change a light bulb. That's about it. But I had to remodel this whole house. And I did not have the money to hire a person. So I was like, great, I'm going to remodel this house. I'm going to take down walls. I'm going to redo electric. I'm going to redo plumbing. So I went out and I bought a Time Life book. And I opened page 1, and I said, and I went through that book, piece by piece, and learned, quite a few times. I did not do the electric quite right and ended up on my back 10 feet away, which may explain a lot. But nonetheless, it was just going through a book and then doing it and making mistakes, but learning from the mistakes, and off you go. So the same thing was true here. It was like, talk to a lot of people, learn from them, get them out here, learn who to hire, because obviously this is more than a house. I cannot do all this on my own. And so through a process of referrals and direct communication, you develop a team, which is what I did. I developed a team of people that I could rely on, both for conversation, but also for getting it done. And it was a short time thereafter that we started logging and farming the land. And by the end of that year, the part that was non-treed, the pasture part, was being planted. So it came together, I think, kind of quickly.
Specifically when you were looking for work in the vineyard, for people to help plant, help design, help think through the vineyard, what did you find yourself, what were you looking for? What was the kind of the characteristic of the people you wanted to help you with a vineyard?
Integrity, I think, was the one thing I really wanted. I didn't know any of these people. And you have referrals, but they come from people I also don't know. Ultimately, Denny, who owns Sojo here, it was his vineyard team that I ended up hiring. Why? Because I knew Denny better than anybody, I guess, at that time. And you have proximity. They're going to be working that vineyard. Why not just develop this vineyard at the same time? You're right here. You got a little savings of resources, as it were. So that, and honestly, I had no other thing to really base it upon. I just didn't know. But they had a good, they gave me some referrals. I walked some vineyards that they had managed. There were some things they were doing that were fantastic. Other things, I was like, well, it's not my philosophy, but, you're not dogmatic in your approach and you'll work with me. And they did. So that, that's how I guess they got picked, was just from a conversation with a neighbor, right? And I think a lot of things around here happen that way, which is fantastic. It's part of the community and the camaraderie that, you have up here. And when I think back at some of the old stories of the pioneers, right, and starting Steamboat, it's like no better example of camaraderie and coming together with, thought and critique to make an industry rise. And that's something, we've started. There's a few Chardonnay groups around here. Obviously, the symposium, the Chardonnay celebration is the largest, but there are many smaller technical ones that are fantastic to be a part of, and it's really fun to get into why what's in your glass is in your glass, right? What brings it to here? And we just did one with all the winemakers from the 2019 vintage of this vineyard. And they're all different expressions, right? But they were, some were harvested on the same day, they come out different. Some were harvested a week apart, and you could notice the slight difference in ripeness or phenolics, right? And it's like, all right, let's dig into when we harvested, what the numbers were, acid bricks, etc. And then what did you do? How did you bring it from a grape to what's in the bottle? And just get into it. And so these are things that I think are happening. They're fantastic because I think it's going to make a better product. It's going to make Oregon, just rise in the international community of fantastic wines. Is it ever going to be Montrachet? I don't know. Montrachet is getting a little warm. So maybe this is down the road. My kids or something. They'll they will be sitting on Grand Cru. It's possible.
So once you have your grapes in the ground, tell me about preparing for your first harvest and all. Was your plan at the time to simply grow and sell grapes? Did you have a plan to make your own wine? Right. And how did you find people to buy your grapes?
The plan never was to make wine. So we'll get back to that. It was merely to be a farmer, sell the grapes, and that was it. So, as first harvest came, my first buyer was Tom and Kate at the Vision. And I had met Kate at at Chardonnay in San Francisco. She and Josh Bergstrom and a few others were doing a tasting there that I went to. These actually were the first Oregon winemakers I met and shook hands with. So she was one of the first. And I really liked their wine. I thought it was fantastic. Separately, I met Tom a little bit later, and the day I met him, a good friend of mine, actually my best friend, who was best man at my wedding, he calls me up. He says, I met this guy in Oregon. You should go meet him. He's a winemaker. And it was Tom Monroe, same guy. And they had met separately, through music. And so it was funny because I met Kate, and then he meets Tom, and I meet Tom, and we just became friends, right away. And Tom, when we were moving into, I guess it was 2018, he and Kate came down here and looked, and immediately they, picked the block that they wanted and said, yeah, we're in. And so that was client number one. And then from there, I met Vincent Friche, and at a lunch. It's one of these good old boys, and Dickie Rassin and Myron, and it's just fun lunches. And I met Vincent, and many months later, I met him at a tasting, and said, you remember sitting next to each other, and da da. He's like, oh yeah. And I was like, well, I'm getting ready to do my first harvest. I don't know if you're looking. And it seems, he came down and looked. He says, yeah, okay, I'm in. And then the third one, there was only 3 that year. The third one was Luke and Meredith at Statera. And I'd met Luke through Tom, and it was at a tasting that I had his Johann Chardonnay. Well, actually, all 3 of his single vineyard Chardonnays, but the Johann, being fairly close to here, was the most comparable, and I loved it. And I was like, I don't know if you want a new source, but I love what you're doing. It was the same with all. I loved with Tom, with Vincent. I loved what they were all doing, and I think that's kind of, critical to who I work with. If I don't like your wine, it probably doesn't make sense for us to work together. But all 3 of these were making fantastic wines, fantastic Chardonnays specifically. So it was an honor that they all said yes, right? And that first harvest was beautiful. It went off. And it was a little frustrating because, you got to line up your harvest crew with the vineyard manager, and, they manage multiple vineyards. Everybody wants the same day. It never works out, right? So the sooner you get your pick date in, the sooner that you can, lock a date in. So everyone, we had one pick. Someone wanted to pick early, but then we were going to have all the rest of the pick done the next day. And Luke decides not to pick. He wants a little bit more. I was like, daggone. This is a pickle, right? But the upside, the silver lining was this, is that at the end of the day, I was able to go out into the vineyard and see how much was picked and what that translated into. Being first harvest, I had no idea what the yield was going to be. And lo and behold, when I saw what was left, it was 2 tons more than Luke wanted. So I was like, oh boy, what do I do? It's the end of September. They're just going to sit and rot on the vine, I guess. So I called Luke. I was like, do you want 2 more tons? And he was only getting like 1.5 at the time or something, right? He said no. I was like, well, all right. And so I quickly got on the phone, called, I don't know, a dozen people. Do you want new fruit in 2 days? Of course, no. So Luke, what do you think about making some wine for me? And so we talked about it, and he agreed on the condition, that I get bins and I get barrels. And it's like, at this point I've got 24 hours. So luckily the neighbor had bins they were not going to use the next day. And then Tim Ramey helped us out with some barrels. And we had what we needed. And the next day, the grapes went up to Abbey Road Farm, and I had a couple barrels made for me. It was interesting because partway through the fermentation process, Luke calls me up. He's, "What do you think? We just we'll just take the fruit." I was like, "It's that good, huh?" So, we worked something out, and it's fantastic. And Luke's been great to work with. I could not have gotten luckier. But again, it's kind of one of those things. There was no preparation. It was, we had 2 days to make all this happen. And we bottled this March and 50 cases and sold all the wine, except a few cases I held back kind of for myself. And it tastes fantastic. And, Luke, I cannot thank him more for, bringing me into kind of a new fold, which is something I never wanted to do, expected to do, but here I am. And we did the same thing in 2020, kept a little bit back, not as much because the crop was short, and I need to actually give grapes to the clients before I take them myself. I'm kind of fallback guy, which is fine. I think this year I've organized a little bit better with my commitments, and we plan on doing more of the Royer label going forward.
I'm going to back up for a second before I ask more about that. You had talked earlier about sort of finding people who align with your philosophy in the vineyard. Tell me, when it came to planting and farming this, what was and is your farming and vineyard philosophy? Yeah,
so it was be as, I don't know if hands-off is the right word, but be as hands-off and as possible, and don't manipulate, don't do stuff. Let the ground and the sun and the rain take care of as much as possible. To this day, my vineyard manager, kind of chides me a little bit. He's like, we can't get the weeds out of your vineyard because you didn't, when we started, we didn't spray herbicide to start the vineyard. We just put the vines right in amongst the weeds and let them grow. And of course, that's one reason why we're on, the new block year 5, and maybe we'll get a harvest this year, But I'm proud to say, hey, Roundup herbicide never hit that. It was never there from day one. But it's a challenge, right? So I think that's been my philosophy, is to let Mother Nature take care of it, to create a microbiome both in the soil and above the soil, with the wildlife that is very harmonious and can take care of itself. I think that's more and more critical as we experience dryness. This is very dry. This vineyard still is not what I would call established. So, I'm out there. You might have seen the 1 gallon water jugs when you came. I'm watering, I spent 8 hours yesterday watering one by one the vines that need watering, because I'm not going to water 49 vines that don't need watering for one that does. But it's time consuming, but it's, it's what I believe is important. It's funny because, I think Oregon, we're 50, 60 years in trying things. We don't have the benefit of the monks and thousands of years mapping everything. But water is one of these key topics, right? And it's going to become increasingly more so. So, we have these discussions all the time, cultivation, no-till, irrigate, don't irrigate. You hear people say, well, if you cultivate, it allows water penetration better. Maybe, yeah. I've heard the opposite approach, that the roots of cover crop create channels for water to go deeper. Everyone's got a story. And, if you cultivate, perhaps you can dry farm better, but you kill your microbiome. If you do no-till, which is something kind of Mimi Castile got me on board with, doing no-till, so this is the first year we're trying it now. Do the vines stress? Perhaps. And if you need to irrigate, I don't know, maybe, but what's the trade-off, right? Is no-till and saving the microbiome and irrigating better or worse than cultivating and not irrigating? I don't have that answer. I don't know if anybody does really, but that's an interesting experiment. And perhaps someday that's something, I will take on. But in the meantime, we don't spray herbicide. Sulfur is, the only thing that's sprayed here. I don't particularly participate in bio with sprays. I do things according to moon cycles, but that's more from my fishing background and understanding tides and the moon and sap flow. rather than reading Rudy Steiner. But I may get into it, right? I've seen benefit at other vineyards. I just don't have the time right now to learn that. But I think there's merit to it. And yeah, it's organic's kind of an overused term. What's organic anymore? It's staying away from things that aren't organic. Okay, and yes, I do. We stay away from things that are not organic. But I think we're just kind of non-interventionalists. Really, kind of more sustainable is kind of a weird word, but I guess sustainable. You could maybe hear the weed whacking going on. That's how we manage weeds here. We weed whack them, or hoe. One or the other. But yeah, I think it's pretty simple. And it may change. This is a new vineyard, so the nutrients in the soil are still quite good. It's possible that we experience nitrogen depletion, in 5 years. And then what do we do? How do we fix nitrogen? Well, cover crop is kind of addressing that right now, and it's something I'm thinking forward to. How do we utilize cover crop to manage the composition of the topsoil, the nutrients that the vines are accessing. So it's an experiment. Like for instance, playing with rootstocks. In this new block we have 7 different clones. Mixed on 7 different types of rootstocks. So some clones have, 2 or 3 different rootstocks associated with them. None have all 7, but so it's all shallow whistly soils, and I'm just going to see how these rootstocks do, and kind of on the clones. There's this grand, Excel spreadsheet that tells me every vine, but outside of that, I'd be lost looking at what's what. But for me, this is kind of experiment number 1. Well, actually number 2. I've got another experiment down here, which is different rootstocks, but more row by row. And we'll see how RG does relative to 101 to 3309 to Schwartzman, and on a same clone, same soil profile, and that'll give me some data. Probably could be this year, could be next year, but we're about to the point where the vines are established, and the rootstock will start giving us information. But certainly the new block's going to be fun. Grand experiment, as it were, and I hope it pays off. It'll never pay off. It's forbiddingly expensive to develop whistle soil.
Pays off in flavor, if nothing else.
If nothing else, thank you.
Well, let's talk a bit about Chardonnay. Obviously, you mentioned Chardonnay as the kind of the driving force here, and the decision to go with Chardonnay. You also had talked a little bit about sort of the evolution of Chardonnay in California into something that a lot of people are kind of turned off by, or think I don't like Chardonnay. So tell me about the notion of Oregon Chardonnay and of the work being done to make a Chardonnay that people will like, and then of overcoming kind of the preconceptions about it when it comes to selling it.
Yeah. Early on, I've not had too many examples of old Oregon Chardonnay, but the ones I've had, and in talking to people that had, 10-year-old when it was current and fresh, the stories that you hear tend to revolve around a wine that was not nuanced, watery, bland, lacking, too acidic, things like that. And it's like, okay, why? Why is it like that? What made it? And it's like, all right, people talk about clones, like maybe it was the 108 clone, it just didn't ripen. Maybe it was planted on inferior soil. Maybe it was just not farmed right because people didn't care, right? They're too busy worried about the Pinot. And all those things are true. It's not one, it's all. And so when looking at it, what I did here is like, this is, a nice prime site that would happily take Pinot Noir, but it all took Chardonnay. So this is, I think, one step in Oregon's evolution to make a better Chardonnay. You got to start with good land. And then you have to pay attention to the land, right? And it's like, I walk these rows every day, and I'm just looking. And sometimes everything looks great, and I don't do a single thing. And other times, it looks like maybe some leaves need to get pulled, or there's something, right? Or there's a sucker, just small things. And it's attention to detail that I think makes a difference. Perhaps at the margin. It certainly probably doesn't trump the site, but it makes a difference. And then, clonal material, right? That's changing. You went from heritage clones to, the Dijon clones that came in, and now Dijon's kind of prominent here. That being said, there's now kind of a reversion at the margin again to heritage clones. As this new block I have, it's slightly more inclined to the sun, a little more western, a little more heat. There's a lot of heritage clones in there. We'll see if they ripen, right? But climate change, I think, is, we'll see what it does to the Dijon clones, and is there a tipping point where it becomes too warm for those clones? That's yet to be determined, but I think it makes some sense, again, to diversify, both in your material and in the habitat itself of the land. So at any rate, that's kind of where Chardonnay, I think was. And now you've got, over the past, 5-6 years, something like that, a real focus on Chardonnay. I think it started with the celebration, the Chardonnay celebration, and all the people that put that together, as an offshoot of IPNC. Fantastic job, and kudos, and thank you for elevating, all of what we're trying to do with Chardonnay here. And yeah, you're seeing people plant on good sites. You're seeing people farm like it's Pinot Noir. You're seeing care and attentiveness. And then you're seeing, great winemakers, take it on now, and want it to be a star right alongside their Pinot Noir, right? Not the ugly stepchild that's kind of in the back. No. You're right alongside now. You're king and queen, right? And that's what it takes. And that's what it takes. And now, as you drink these wines, they're full of beauty and nuance and elegance, and they're capable of aging, and they're their own thing, right? They're not California. They're not Burgundy. They're Oregon. And it was funny because a good friend of mine makes wine in Santa Cruz, and kind of a new shop there, and does a lot of Chardonnay, high elevation, Santa Cruz Mountains, some beautiful stuff. And he sent me up a bottle. He goes, Mark, you're going to love this. He goes, it's very Oregonian. I was like, well, okay, it's not Burgundian anymore, it's Oregonian. I was like, fantastic, we've arrived.
High praise.
Yeah, so fantastic. But I think that this is where, Chardonnay's headed. It's headed on center stage. I think sales-wise, it probably doesn't, compare to California yet, but at least in the groups that I drink with, and my clients, Oregon is becoming an easier sell. It's becoming a greater sell than other regions. Burgundy's getting expensive, and limited in quantity with kind of the climatic issues they're having there, whether it's heat or hail. Just supply's not that great. So Oregon's in a great position to kind of benefit, and I think the fact that it's being taken very seriously is really going to put us on center stage, if it has not already. I think it has, in many regards. You look at who's coming into Oregon now, like what's the money, right? You always follow the money trail. And the money trail here is French people coming in, right? They see the potential, not just the quality, but the fun factor, I think, the experimentation. It's not restricted in so many ways. But also big California money's coming up here, larger companies, Jackson and such. And just California tech people and whatnot, just a lot of money from there. So it's like, okay, great, a lot of money's coming into Oregon, what's that going to do? And that, I think, is yet to be determined, but hopefully it's all good. But yeah, I think that's where Chardonnay, it's very exciting, and I think we are, we're starting to get to that curve where it's going to be, we're really going to shine. So I'm looking forward to it.
With your own brand now to sell, tell me about sort of the market reaction when you're selling Chardonnay. Is it easier than you anticipated? Is it harder? How did you sell your wine?
Well, let's, back up a second. I only made 50 cases, right? I mean, I don't know if I'd call that a label. And for the most part, it went to friends and family, and through Courtier, my wine company. So I had existing clients and selling, I guess I probably sold 45 cases. It was not that hard. If that was a 500 case, it would be a different story we'd be having, because then I'd have to actually get out, knock on doors, do real work. But a couple barrels, you do that in your sleep, really. And I know 2020 being what was for me at least small. I mean, only one barrel, and that's already sold off to the people that bought last year's. But the reception was very good. It was funny, I'll tell you. There's this thing called bottle shock, and you every now and again you have a bottle, and someone says, "Oh, bottle shock," and it's like, okay, I don't really know what you mean. I mean, it's a little tempered, it's different. I don't know, but I have nothing to compare to. So right before we bottled, I drank a glass, out of the tank, and I said, "Yeah, we're ready to bottle. This is really good." So we bottled, and about 4 days later, I opened one of those bottles. I was like, "This is not my wine." I'm like, it's like somebody switched the baby, right? So I was mortified, and I immediately took the bottle back away, and it's like, "No one's drinking. No soup for you." So, I was like, "Wow, that's bottle shock." And it took a couple months, for it to come back around. But now it's back around, and it's fantastic. And like I said, it was mostly people I know purchased the wine, and almost every single one has come back to me with a note that how much they like it, why they like it, and can they get more, right? So it's been, granted, it's all your friends and family, so they're just perhaps being nice on one hand, but being so many people did it and they wanted to buy more, and they already bought next year's, is very promising at the margin. Again, it's again, we're not talking about that much that makes me have to go out and really work at this too hard. But someday, maybe this coming vintage, we'll do 75 cases. But I think again, I never had an expectation to want to have a label, to make wine. I thank Luke every day for taking on that responsibility. But who says I never wanted a label, yet I have one. I don't want to go over 50 cases. I probably will. Things happen, right?
Well, we've talked a little bit about 2020 already, so I'm curious. I'm gonna have a couple questions about last year for you. Let's start with the pandemic part of things, and going back to last spring. Tell me about sort of COVID coming, personal and professional reactions at the time. What did you have to do to change, and sort of how did you react and get through last year?
Yeah, so it was, like I said, I was living part-time in a rental in Northwest Portland and part-time down here. Now, unbeknownst, to COVID, I'd made the decision to, at the end of March, to move down here full-time. And that was right around the time COVID became a thing. And it was right around the time Portland shut down, became a ghost town. So the timing could not have been better to come down here, move down here full-time, and quarantine, which is what I did for the whole year. Stayed down here, I farmed a lot, and didn't see many people, and just kind of hung out with, at the time, my fiance and the cats, and it was fantastic. I could not have been in a better spot. I think did it really change the way we did things last year? No, not really. And the vineyard's going to kind of operate the way it is. I mean, we spent more money on labor, which you need extra people to monitor protocol. Hey, baby. But for the most part, it kept kept an even keel. I think personally here, obviously on a wider scale, it changed a number of things. But again, that's probably a separate conversation. And and then of course, then the end of the year or the fall hit with the fires, and for the vineyard that had a bigger impact. It was interesting when I mean, luckily, knock on wood, right? The fruit survived, and it was a great harvest. And drinking out of the barrels as recently as last week, the Chardonnay is amazing. So I'm really happy with the 2020 harvest. you know, and again, I'm one of those years I'm glad I didn't have Pinot Noir. But yeah, it was scary. You know, the skies were crazy. You didn't know when it was going to end. You know, I'm kind of living here full time. I got nowhere to go. I should have took off for the beach or something, but I did not. I wanted to protect. You know, it's like this is my baby, right? I don't want to leave you, and so did not leave and stayed through the whole thing, and wondering if it was going to get better or get worse every single day, and you just never knew. And and you know, we're right in the middle of harvest, and you know, one of the clients harvested right at the beginning of the fire. Just made the decision to get the fruit off, and it was you know, a little bit early, perhaps, but you know, fantastic to get some fruit off on one hand, and it was, the grapes are part of a bigger blend anyway, so it I don't think it had an impact on what they were making. But yeah, then it was like, gosh, you know, this is getting worse and worse, and but it was interesting, you know, the dynamics of the fire. I don't know, you know, if you talk to people on the east side, but the smoke kind of came in low on the east side and then hit the ridgeline and came high over here and then out to sea and you know, muffled around for a while. But our smoke here was very high, and we didn't get ash and things like that. So I think the impact was a little bit less on our side than the east side. But nonetheless, it impacted some vineyards. And it was just outright scary. I mean, and is it a predictor, right? I mean, this was the first one I've seen, you know, this close. In California, a few here and there, but you know, in Oregon, no. And you know, we've got one going on right now in Southern Oregon, and it's like, gosh, you know, I hope this is not a here we go again scenario. But this, you know, kind of tells you that things are changing, and we need to do whatever we can do to minimize the chance of, you know, more things burning, more climate change, heating things up to create the conditions for things to burn. And how do we do that? And there's, you know, 1,000 different ways. But just, you know, pick one and go do it, right?
You mentioned earlier when you talk about the pandemic part of things, sort of the things that changed in the industry and sort of in life in general, and now that we're starting to come out, see the other side of that a little bit, what changes do you see sticking around, sort of in the wine industry and what you in Oregon, and what do you see kind of returning back to where it was before?
Sure. You know, the one thing I saw, which maybe comes from my experience with Courtier, was people bought a lot more wine, and not just a lot more, but they upped their per bottle purchase price. So they're like, gosh, you know, in a restaurant, I paid X dollars for this bottle, and at the retail shop, you know, it's a lot less. So, but I'm still happy spending X dollars, so why don't I buy this other bottle? And suddenly you saw people's, you know, they up their game. And that's kind of stuck around, which is fantastic, right? I mean, Oregon does not sell cheap bottles. You know, we are, give or take, higher priced. We don't appeal to every market, but I believe we appeal to a lot more markets than we did before the pandemic. And people are like used to spending $50 a bottle for Pinot now. Like a couple years ago, maybe 30 was a number, you know, for what they would spend for a nice bottle. Now 50 is no problem. So that's something I think that's going to stick around, and that's fantastic. You know, I think the thing that really hurt is the restaurant scene. You know, in Portland, restaurants are kind of part and parcel of existence. And, you know, a number of friends own restaurants there. It was, you know, sad, disheartening to see them shut down, in some cases to go away. It's beautiful to see the ones that have come back. And I think the way they've come back has been brilliant. You know, and this is part of what happened during COVID was creating dining experiences, right? Where you're not just going into a place with people around you and trying to have a conversation, but you're hearing like 5 other conversations. Now you're a little bit more private. I mean, we did this great dinner, not that we went to a great dinner, that was put on by a chef whose name I cannot recall right now. And it was one of these American Express dinners, and they had these beautiful yurt-style tents out in like a parking lot in the southeast. And it was in the wintertime, so it was like a little decorated pretty and a little drizzly and had ambiance, right? Almost like you're in Europe. And you sit inside this yurt with just your people, 6 people or 4 to 8, I guess, was the size of the tents, and it had this beautiful dining experience. Unlike I've been accustomed to. And I think you're kind of seeing, to some level, this partitioning of your parties to allow a little bit more intimate experience, which I think is fantastic. From a restaurant's perspective, I don't know how they make that work, because it's less people, less turnover. The finances probably are terrible, but somehow they're making it work, and I applaud them. And whatever we can do as patrons, we should be doing. Tip more, but keep people employed, right? I mean, we need restaurants, so let's do all we can do. Other things. I think people generally are more cautious, which is a good thing ultimately. Whether we'll keep wearing masks all the time, I don't know. I still do if I go into a grocery store. Obviously right now we're not, and that's great. I remember seeing some of your interviews a year ago, and some people are still wearing masks. It's nice we don't have to anymore. It's great that the vaccines are out. That being said, there's still a significant portion that refuse to get vaccinated, and it's how do you deal with that if you run a business, right? Like, you don't know who's coming into your restaurant. You're not wearing a tag, right, that says you're vaccinated. And can a non-vaccinated person, take your business down? I don't know. But I think it's a question, that probably should be addressed at some point if it starts happening. I don't know. I guess that's all I got on that topic.
Been a lot to think about the last year or so, and a lot of things to see change. So let's talk a little bit about the future then. Start with the future for you here. Obviously, coming into early harvest, still you got a new site, hopefully online this year. What are you looking forward to for the vineyard and for your own life here?
Yeah. The vineyard, I just hope for another successful harvest. That we get through this dry spell and the grapes are happy and the winemakers are happy, most importantly. But, we've got a few new clients this year. The vineyard, we did 1.2 tons last year per acre, so pretty small. And this year, there was an expectation for 2 tons. I don't think we're going to get there. We had some shatter this year with the fruit set. So I don't know where we're going to be. We'll do estimates, at some point soon. But yeah, you hope for healthy grapes. You hope the birds don't eat them, which is something that happens. But that's kind of where I'd like to see. With 2 new clients coming on this year, I hope that they get excited about what they have. I know the returning clients. Well, I would assume the returning clients are happy because they're returning. And then, yeah, I'm going to expand the Royer label a little bit, with the new block, with the mixed clones and rootstocks. And honestly, I have no idea what that is going to even taste like. So there's no point marketing it out as a grape for sale. We'll make wine, and then if it's good, we'll market the wine to the grapes for sale. But so that's exciting. It's always exciting to bring something new on, and this will be something new this year.
And speaking of something new, I know you just recently got married here on site, so congratulations on that.
Thank you. Yes.
Outside of wine and vines, what are the things you're looking forward to, plans or projects on the horizon? Yeah.
So thank you for those kind words. We actually had the wedding right here. It was beautiful. Had a nice group of people and enjoyed a lot of good wine and music and dancing. It was great to bring a group of people back and just enjoy being around people in a festive atmosphere. And it went on far longer than I ever anticipated into the wee hours, but bravo, right? So, what do I look forward to? I look forward to, there's a couple things, again, I think thinking about diversity, one thing that, that my wife is into is tea. And we actually had a conversation with Larry Stone about this, who actually was the officiant at the wedding. And he knows a bit about tea as well, a bit about everything. So we have planted some tea plants here, and we are going to see how they do, and we're going to see how the leaves, come out, and can they produce a interesting tea or not. And there's a place in Minto Island right here down in Salem that is a tea producer. One of the few in America. There's not many. The climate perhaps is not exactly right, but we'll see what it can do. I think again it's just part of diversifying and having something that's agricultural but different than a grape. And we'll pick some leaves next fall, next spring, and break them down and roast them and make tea and see where we are. And it's possible that tea becomes a thing out here. It's certainly on the horizon. Other things, it's just really getting, this vineyard established still. There's still a lot of babying and hand-holding with these young vines. And I think this is the last year for that in the main 10 acres, because the vines will be pretty well grown by the end of this year, which will be nice, because then I can focus on the other 6 acres I haven't planted yet. And it's like, what do I do there? I don't know. Is it apples? Is it cherries? Is it more hazelnut trees? Is it grapes? And if so, what type of grapes? The overall LLC is here, Willamette white wine is what it's called. So it's going to be a white grape. No, but more Chardonnay, maybe. We'll see. I mean, with thoughts toward climate change, what do I want to plant? That's going to be really good in 10 years. And I don't have that answer today, but I think about it every day. And I expect to do something in 2022. So, I still have a few months to noodle on this and come up with an answer. But, I don't know, UTV race park? I don't know.
To be continued.
To be continued, yeah.
So talking about the future beyond here, I'm curious what you see for the future of the Oregon wine industry. You talked a little bit about climate change, talked a little bit about sparkling. So what do you see coming out of the pandemic for Oregon wine, and what is it going to look like in the future?
Yeah, great question. Putting this crazy heat aside, I think the future is very bright for Oregon. I think we, are in a position to, both with resources, the money coming in, but also with the brilliant leadership that we have from like the Oregon Wine Board, the Oregon Wine Growers Association. The talent that drives those organizations is second to none. And what they're able to do for us as a community, both, with legislative issues, with marketing issues, with basic information on how to do stuff, even stuff as simple as helping us with health insurance and FedEx, shipments. From the base layer all the way up to, Congress, they're taking care of it. And all they ask from us is a simple dues payment. Thank you. We'll do that. And add, value where we can. But they are the workhorses. And I don't know any other state that has this kind of leadership that we do. So, I thank them all the time for what they're doing for us. They are a machine, that is rising the community, as it were. But I think it's also the people, right? This is a pretty tight-knit group, across all the AVAs. There's not too many people you don't know and don't feel comfortable having a conversation with. And batting ideas back and forth. As I said, we more ideas and groups are getting together to share, to critique, to be better. And I think that continues. More so now that the pandemic's kind of in the rearview mirror, because you're comfortable meeting people, you're comfortable that you're not going to bring something home to your family. You have, time and wherewithal to do it. So I think that's all going to better the industry here. But like what else, right? What else? All right, let's talk grapes for a minute, right? Yeah, Chardonnay's fantastic, and it's maybe the second newest kid on the block. I don't know. What's new? I mean, Gamay perhaps, right? You see Gamay plantings happening. It's a little bit more adaptable, I think. The climate and the soils here really tend to like that grape, and what is coming out, what's being put in bottle, is fantastic at great price points. And so I think that's another thing, is price point, right? We're still, although people are spending more in Pinot, they not everyone is. And to be able to bring more people to the Oregon market, you probably need a different price point. And I think Gamay's helping with that. And it's kind of like a gateway drug almost to our little part of the world here. But what else is out there after Gamay? I think Gamay's here. It's and I think like speaking of Tom and Kate, they've done a great job to promote that grape and to bring it to the light of the nation, right? But there's other grapes out there, and as it gets warmer and warmer and drier, we will find the next grape. I don't know what it's going to be. Maybe it's some Italian white wines. That's probably something I may dabble in. But we'll see. But yeah, it's a fantastic place to be, and barring most days, it's perfect weather. I mean, during the growing season at least. And I really couldn't ask for anything more out of life.
So we had talked a little bit earlier about sort of the future of Oregon wine, and you gave a great answer there. But one thing you were talking about earlier was sparkling. So tell me about sparkling in Oregon, what you've seen so far in it, and what you kind of look as you're looking ahead for sparkling.
Sure. So it's my belief that everyone should drink sparkling wine. Period. Every day if possible. And while I would say champagne is the best choice, and I think today probably still is, Oregon is every single bottle I drink better and better and better. And that is exciting, because this is the type of thing that we don't have in mass right now. It's possible. We have the right grapes for it, right? We have Chardonnay and we have Pinot. And with the desire perhaps to pick earlier because of whatever reason, rains or fires or call it what you will, it allows us to do that and to create fantastic sparkling wine. Again, it's there's money going into it, right? And not just local money building production facilities and such to be able to custom make sparkling, which is a pain to make, time consuming, expensive. You can't just do it on your own. So to have kind of a custom facility is amazing. But also you look at Boulanger just bought in, so that's kind of a stamp of approval, right, from one of the great champagne houses that, hey, this is a special place in the world, and we believe that sparkling wine can be made there. So I was when I heard that news, I was joyed. But I like drinking locally, I really do, and I love sparkling wine. So if I can, personally drink more Oregon, that's what I'm going to do. Where else? There's a few places in California that make, some storied places, Schramsborg, et cetera, that have been around since day one, and they make a fantastic wine as well. But to have it made here is fantastic and great. And I think we have the ability, the capability, the raw materials to do it. And so I hope it gets done.
Fantastic. Well, that's all the questions that I have for you, Mark. Is there anything I didn't ask that I should have today? Anything we didn't cover that we should have covered?
No, I think we got it all. That's Rich, I thank you very much for popping out here. This has been fantastic talk.
Thank you for us too, and thank you for the tour and showing off your site. This is it's beautiful to see, and we're excited to see where it goes next. So
great.
Thank you for your time, for your stories, and we'll go and let you off the hook.
Cheers. Thanks.